Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. He arrived in the village just after the thaw, when the snow still clung to the edges of stone roofs and the silence carried weight. His boots sank into soft earth, the air too thin for ease, too still for comfort. No signs, no greetings, just weathered eyes behind curtained windows, watching him pass like wind through pine. She waited in a one-room home at the edge of a forgotten path. 87, maybe older, her voice like air over dry leaves. She hadn't spoken her dialect in years. No one left to speak it to. He set down the recorder, adjusted the gain, and nodded once. That was all she needed. The words came slow at first, pulled from deep memory, shaped by lips that hadn't formed them in decades. He documented each phrase meticulously, noting inflections, shifts, breath patterns. Hours passed. Shadows grew long. She stopped mid-sentence once, her expression distant, then resumed with something he didn't recognize. One syllable. A short, toneless sound. Not repeated. No explanation. She didn't pause after it, didn't look up. It simply fell into the flow like a stone into water that left no ripple. Later, in the guest room of the mayor's house, he sat with headphones on, reviewing the material. The fire had gone out. He didn't notice. His pencil moved instinctively, marking timestamps, drawing phonetic curves, highlighting inconsistencies. When the syllable played, his hand froze. He rewound. Played it again. Slower. It wasn't tonal. It wasn't dialectal. It didn't match any structure or borrowed term. It sat outside the grammar like a splinter in clean wood. He didn't annotate it. He circled it in red and wrote nothing. By morning, the villagers found him still at the desk. His head tilted back, eyes closed, mouth slightly open as if interrupted mid-thought. The recorder was off. The fire had been relit. No sign of struggle, no illness known. They sent the tapes with the returning supply run, addressed to the Institute. No one asked for payment. No one mentioned the syllable. The old woman passed a week later, alone. She never spoke again after that interview. The file sat in a padded envelope for 3 weeks before anyone opened it. When they did, they followed protocol. Catalog, transcribe, archive. No urgency. No suspicion. Just another piece of a dying language. Until someone pressed play. The gates groaned as they opened, not from rust, but from use without care. Dust clung to the walls in a way that suggested it had settled decades ago and had since made peace with staying. The courtyard was empty. Windows were open but gave no light. Something about the building didn't feel abandoned, it felt tolerated. She stepped through the corridor with her bag still slung over her shoulder. No one greeted her. A photocopier whirred somewhere deep inside the structure, as if remembering how to be useful. A dog barked once in the distance and wasn't heard again. Inside the archive room, the air was cooler. A makeshift team of 6 shared the space. They didn't speak often, not out of hostility but focus. A preservationist from Marseille was cleaning reel-to-reel spools with a brush the size of a toothbrush. A phonologist from Seoul had been sleeping in his chair. Someone had pushed a table against a wall of cracked plaster to stabilize it, and no one had moved it since. They weren't there for headlines. They were there because they knew how to listen to languages that no one else remembered how to speak. On her first evening, she was handed a stack of unprocessed recordings with a nod and no instructions. The van file sat near the bottom. She played the first few tapes without much reaction. Words faded in and out of meaning. Some she translated. Others resisted her. The work was steady, even if the surroundings were not. When she finally reached the van recording, the sound was clean. The woman's voice carried with an eerie clarity, clear enough to make her sit up. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, but something in her expression changed when the syllable surfaced. She rewound. Listened again. Paused. Listened once more. She didn't write it down. Not at first. She only sat still, like someone watching water move uphill. A day later, during a shared review session, A colleague working on Tungusic phonemes overheard it through her headphones and stopped mid-sentence. He asked her to replay it. She obliged. He searched his files, opened a chant recorded 10 years ago near the Kalima River. No mutual root. No shared linguistic ancestry. But there it was again, identical in tone, shape, length. No meaning. No context. One utterance once. They listened in silence, trading recordings without speaking. It had no echo of origin, no linguistic fingerprint. Not a sound evolved through use. Not a loanword. Not a mutation. Something else. Work paused for the first time in weeks. Others were brought in quietly, cautiously. Not as a discovery, but as a curiosity. They began pulling recordings from different continents, centuries, archives untouched for years. Nothing published. No memos. Just internal murmurs passed around like rumors. The syllable surfaced in more recordings. A lullaby in Sardinia. A morning chant in Borneo. A greeting ritual in remote Mongolia. Always once. Never reused. Never explained. Each time, the same moment of recognition crossed their faces. Not surprise. Not excitement. Something colder. Not everyone spoke about it afterward. The days lengthened inside that building. Time became marked not by clocks, but by moments of shared silence. When the sound played, no one reached for definitions. They only listened. Again and again, as if waiting for it to become something it refused to be. They began keeping tallies. Columns of languages, timestamps, regions, historical ranges. Not for cataloging. No one believed this would ever be published, but to understand how far it reached. Each entry marked a language thought to be isolated. Dialects spoken by a few dozen, chants passed through ritual, fragments reconstructed from bone flutes and mouth shapes carved into temple stone. Always one instance. Never a second. The sound refused to bend. It didn't blend with neighboring phonemes. It left no trail in sentence structure. It resisted etymology like a sealed door. No suffix. No prefix. No plural form. Just a sound, bare, clean, as if excised from everything language is meant to carry. At first, they joked. Linguists living on powdered soup and bad lighting had little else to dull the edge. They called it the rootless root, the anti-lexeme. Humor made it manageable. Until someone played it backwards. No change. Played it slowed, still identical. Equal pitch. Equal breath. Across genders, climates, millennia. It behaved like it wasn't being spoken, but issued. Not constructed but recalled. Like breath remembered by the mouth, not shaped by the mind. One of them, a semioticist who'd been called in from Zurich, spoke after hours of quiet. Not a theory, not a conclusion. Just a line. It's not a word. It's a mark. That stayed with them. They returned to field recordings. Searched for exceptions. Every culture that had preserved it had done so unconsciously, as though carrying an ember without knowing it could burn. But it never repeated. No language used it twice. No variant. No inflection. Like a match that strikes once and leaves ash behind. They tested it through software. Pattern recognition tools failed to categorize it. Neural classifiers misfiled it as noise. One flagged it as a click. Another, a glottal stop. None agreed. When they adjusted for vocal tract differences, the waveforms aligned in a way that defied human phonetic variation. Different speakers. Same delivery. Same duration. Same harmonic residue. One researcher suggested it was parasitic, a meme that latched onto linguistic structures without meaning, surviving in the silence between what could be taught and what had to be known. Another, more cautious, said it might be neither intrusive nor organic, but something else entirely, something fossilized in the cognitive layer before language became external. No consensus emerged. Only the sound remained, repeating across continents like a monument with no inscription. No group had invented it. No people had claimed it. It was simply there, quiet, uninvited, and always alone. The first pins on the map were cautious. small, color-coded tags marking where the syllable had appeared. Northern Mongolia, coastal Peru, a river delta in Nigeria, an island off the coast of Sakhalin. Each point alone meant nothing. Together they formed no shape, no sequence, just scattered marks across centuries and oceans. They stared at the board longer than they admitted. At first, they expected connections. Trade routes, migrations, colonizations, something to link them. The threads refused to appear. No shared ancestry, no linguistic borrowing. The pattern didn't align with human movement. It ignored chronology. It ignored geography. It obeyed no logic known to language, no history taught in any university. The only thing they agreed on was that the distribution wasn't random. It felt placed. One researcher, newer to the team, began cataloging early speech sounds in infants. A control test. Just another angle. He extracted babble sequences from decades of pediatric recordings. Most were standard, vowel-heavy, high-pitched, instinctive. But in a handful, buried between syllables shaped by imitation and instinct, it was there. Quiet. Momentary. The same syllable. Spoken before comprehension. Before instruction. Before the concept of name. Another, older, quieter, had been working through a university archive of untreated psychiatric transcripts. Voices unraveling into repetition. Delusion caught in rhythm. She found it not in words, but in the fallback, what patients said when meaning collapsed. The syllable emerged not in place of sense, but when sense had left entirely. Always once. Never revisited. They argued, not out of ego, but disbelief. One called it pareidolia. Another, convergence, a point all language returns to when stripped of structure. A residue of sound at the border of thought. They ran statistical models. The numbers resisted simplicity. Frequency too low for coincidence. Too precise for error. There were moments no one spoke. They sat at the map, listening to the same sound played from different continents, through different mouths, under different skies. None of it repeated. But none of it changed. One proposed a neurological reflex. Another said it was ancestral, passed not through culture but cognition, a fragment embedded in the architecture of articulation itself. No agreement followed. Only unease. It was no longer about translation. It wasn't even about understanding. It was about how many times something could appear without ever being placed. How a sound could cross the entire history of language without belonging to any of it. There was no trail to follow. No origin to trace. Just the shape of something that should not be there, appearing with the regularity of breath. The box was mislabeled. Misfiled sometime before the earthquake, forgotten during the years of staff cuts and silent departures. No digital record. No lone history. Just a handwritten code on a peeling label and dust too old to disturb. It was opened out of boredom, not intent. A search for spare magnetic tape, nothing more. Inside, wrapped in thin linen that had stained dark at the edges, lay a fragment of obsidian. Not chipped, not broken, but carved. Not recently. The edges had softened with time. But the surface still held it, one mark, etched with a precision no one could explain, shaped by something sharper than stone. It was unmistakable. Not similar. Not suggestive. Identical. The symbol wasn't decorative. It didn't match any script. Not pictographic, not abstract. Its geometry resisted classification. But when superimposed onto the waveform of the sound, the alignment was exact. The arc matched the vowel rise. The notch, the breath before release. It had been inscribed with full knowledge of the sound, not its meaning. They traced its origin to a dig site catalogued 34 years earlier. A cave dated to the Upper Paleolithic. Human remains nearby. No known writing. No symbolic tradition. Just animal bones, charcoal, ochre. And this shard, logged and shelved before it had ever been examined. One of the researchers found a reproduction in a forgotten pre-Sumerian catalog, a clay seal marked with the same shape, half eroded, buried in the corner of a decorative border. Thousands of years apart. Thousands of kilometers distant. No cultural link. No migration route. Just recurrence. Another brought in rubbings from an Iberian cave site long dismissed as indecipherable. Symbols etched into rock with no reference. The same mark appeared near the center. Larger than the others. Untranslated. They didn't celebrate. No one spoke of breakthrough. There was no elation in the room. Only a stillness, heavy with the realization that the sound hadn't followed language. It had preceded it. Not as a building block. Not as a component. As something complete. Intact before context. Preserved not in speech, but in the physical, as if someone had once tried to trap it, contain it, hold it still. It called into question every method they had used. Every assumption they had held about the origin of language, of communication, of cognition. It wasn't just that the syllable had survived. It was that it had survived untouched. The proposal came quietly. A note scribbled in the margin of a report. A sentence only half understood when first read. The sound did not emerge from language. Language may have emerged around it. Not designed. Not constructed. Just shaped by something that had already been there. And still was. He stopped sleeping 3 nights before he left. No announcement. No farewell. He emptied his desk, returned the equipment, and packed without making noise. He had been humming under his breath in recent days, but no one could place the tune. He said he wasn't tired. Just clear. He spoke of the sound as if it were not something they had found, but something that had been waiting. On the morning he disappeared, his notebook was left open on the common table. A single page. The words cramped and uneven. The sound knows it is being noticed. The ink trailed off at the edge, as if the sentence had interrupted itself. They found his body on the northern slope, arms crossed over his chest, boots removed and placed beside him. No coat. No bag. He had brought nothing but a recorder and the obsidian shard he wasn't authorized to remove. The recorder had no batteries. The shard was resting on his chest, balanced carefully as if arranged with purpose. No injuries. No struggle. No explanation. The mountain was cold, but not cold enough. The weather had been clear. He should have made it back. No one retrieved the shard. No one argued about it. After that, the building changed. Nothing architectural. But the sound began turning up in places it hadn't been placed. The electric hum of the freezer in the storage room. The soft hiss of the intercom when no one was speaking. A floorboard settling at night. The rhythm matched. Too closely. Too consistently. Not similar, identical. Veradin heard it in the insects that gathered outside the window. Not in their volume. In their cadence. A pause, a rise, a release. Always the same shape. She timed it. It repeated every 11 minutes. Not behavior. Pattern. Someone tried isolating environmental recordings to disprove it. But once the waveforms aligned, no one said anything. The file was deleted without discussion. The deletion was never logged. The researcher working on early child speech left next. No conflict. No formal resignation. Just a message forwarded to the director's inbox. She cited nausea, disorientation, and auditory hallucinations that had begun while transcribing. She said the syllable echoed in her inner ear when no sound was present. Not imagined, embedded. A presence behind silence. No one replaced her. Fieldwork reports began to trail off. Requests were left unanswered. Archived recordings were left untagged. Conversations grew short, then infrequent. The focus shifted from discovery to containment. Not because anyone had said so, but because it felt necessary. They stopped speaking the sound aloud. Not out of fear, but out of something colder. Like speaking it would confirm its awareness. Like saying it too often might make it more real than anything else. It began with a draft. A quiet document passed between 3 hands. Meant for peer review. No institution header, no contact details. Just analysis, mapped distributions, frequency charts, phonetic overlays. The sound recorded across centuries, layered until the uniformity became impossible to mistake. No conclusion. No claim. Only this: a phoneme found in every language, once, with no origin and no apparent function. One of them sent it beyond the room. Believing exposure was the only protection. The rationale made sense on paper. Silence had started to feel complicit. The leak surfaced on a small journal site used mostly by graduate researchers. It was pulled within hours, but not before it had been copied, passed to forums, uploaded, mirrored. The responses came slowly at first, then faster. People began sending recordings, some authentic, others broken. But some matched perfectly. The Institute received no formal letter, no stamp, no official reprimand. A phone call arrived at dusk, not from a known office, not from a listed number. The voice on the other end spoke without pause. It did not explain. It instructed. They were to discontinue the work. All materials relating to the phoneme were to be destroyed. Recordings, notes, derivative files, waveform data. All of it. Nothing archived. Nothing handed over. The instruction was final. A day later, their funding evaporated. Access credentials expired. Server rooms went dark. A courier arrived without name or badge and collected 5 storage drives. The drives were not signed out. The logs were deleted the same evening. They gathered once in the main room, but no agreement was reached. Some argued for preservation, others for erasure. One said they had gone too far already. Another said the only mistake had been delay. Doors began closing. Rooms were locked without notice. Research terminals returned to default state. The janitor stopped coming. Some packed quickly. No confrontation. Just departure. Others lingered, waiting for clarity that would never arrive. She remained. Long after the offices emptied, long after the power reduced to a single flickering bulb in the north corridor, she stayed. Not because she was ordered to. Not because she was hopeful. Because the sound had settled into her memory with such precision, she no longer trusted recordings to hold it correctly. She began reconstructing it by hand. No playback. No reference. Just pencil marks on graph paper, measuring slope, breath length, tonal onset. She sketched the waveform as if sketching a face she knew too well to misremember. Not once did she speak it aloud. Some nights she worked by candle, listening to the silence between the wind and the wires. She was no longer trying to find it. She was preserving it as if it had always been there, and only she remembered why. She didn't tell anyone she was going. The flight was paid in cash. The permits were borrowed under a different project name. She arrived with a guide who didn't ask questions and left before the ascent began. No cell coverage. No satellite marker. Only a stack of photocopied dig records from a decade-old excavation that had ended before it truly began. The cave was known, but not explored. The entrance sealed not for protection, but for neglect. Geologists had marked the obsidian deposit once, noted the mineral composition, and moved on. There was no history recorded there. No evidence of settlement. Only a narrow descent, barely wide enough for her shoulders, dry as though water had never known its shape. She carried no camera. Only graphite, a field notebook, a flashlight wrapped in red cloth, and the sketch of the symbol etched onto the obsidian shard. The slope led her downward for 40 minutes, deeper than the surveys had indicated. The air held no smell, no decay, no mineral bite. Just weight. At the base, the walls widened into a dome, not cut, not hollowed, but formed. The surface of the stone was smoother than it had any right to be. Natural processes didn't shape rock like that. Not in these layers. Not at this depth. No markings lined the entrance. No residue of torch smoke. But the back wall, half embedded in the curvature, held something unmistakable. Symbols carved without flair or pattern, not decorative, not chaotic. Just one syllable, repeated across different alphabets, each ancient, each long dead. Not arranged, but layered. as if the same hand had carved them one at a time, over centuries, without moving. She didn't approach right away. She sat. Listened. Not to sound, but to the absence of it. Even her breath didn't echo. The air pressed inward. She stood after an hour. No calculation, no impulse. Just the stillness deciding it was time. She stepped forward, placed her hand against the smoothest of the carvings, and spoke it once. The syllable emerged as if it had always lived in her mouth. No vibration followed. No echo. But the floor shifted in feeling, not movement. The space compressed. Not physically. Perceptually. As if the dimensions had been changed, not by motion, but by permission. She didn't fall. She didn't speak again. She stood within that subtle distortion, and something responded. Not sound. Not energy. Something unplaceable. The pressure didn't increase. It inverted. The sense of inside and outside lost their separation. Her heartbeat slowed without struggle. Her knees weakened without strain. Her thoughts quieted without silence. She wrote nothing. She touched no other mark. She turned once, slowly, and left without looking back. The sound did not follow her. It stayed where it had always been. Waiting, not to be found, but remembered. The train was delayed by 6 minutes. Enough to cause glances at watches, a few muttered complaints, nothing more. The man in the third car had fallen asleep seated upright, his arms folded, chin tilted down just slightly. No one paid attention to him. The announcement tone cut through the static, barely audible over the engine's thrum. But what drew the attention of the woman across from him wasn't the noise. It was his lips, moving without breath, forming a shape she had heard once, years before, during an internship cataloging dialects in the north. A shape she hadn't thought about since. A single sound, spoken clearly in sleep, and never repeated. She left the train at the next stop without looking back. In a nursery outside Krakow, a child no older than 2 sat up during the quietest hour of night and spoke one word into the darkness. No one was present. No monitor recorded it. The only witness was a nurse walking past the open door, slowed by nothing more than fatigue. She stopped, thinking she'd imagined it. The syllable had no weight in Polish. It held no role in early childhood speech development. But something about the shape of it slowed her heartbeat and made her turn without reason. The child had already laid back down. The room was silent. She never told anyone, but she never forgot the sound. In a field lab in Buenos Aires, an aging linguist scanned acoustic spectrograms of canine vocalizations for an unrelated study on frequency patterns in domesticated mammals. He wasn't looking for language. He wasn't looking for symbols. But in one file, buried beneath a bark so hoarse it almost failed to register, he saw the contour. Not similar. Not approximate. Identical. The timing. The tonal lift. The breath threshold before release. All of it. He played it twice, then deleted the file and left the room. The institute's doors were sealed without announcement. No final report. No red tape. The building stood empty for months before local officials repurposed it for storage. All markings were painted over. The archive room was cleared of anything legible. But one page remained beneath a radiator no one thought to check. A phoneme diagram, hand-drawn. No label. No context. Just the curve. Quietly retrieved. Quietly discarded. She was never found. No coordinates filed. No message received. Her name appeared once in a shipping ledger weeks later, attached to a parcel containing 2 books on archaic phonology and a stone fragment with no return address. The books were logged. The fragment was misplaced. The signature was illegible. But the sound did not vanish. It began showing up in ambient recordings. Long-form surveillance audio, wildlife monitoring loops, raw atmospheric data feed. Not constantly. Not clearly, but real. Documented. Verified. Removed. Disregarded. Always unexplained. People heard it in strange places. Rain hitting glass in an empty room. Pipes adjusting before dawn. The stretch of a floorboard under no weight. Always once. Always alone. There was no meaning to assign. No function to decode. It didn't offer clarity. It didn't behave as message. It was not communicative. It was present. Not as a remnant but as a state. Not forgotten. Not hidden. Simply unchanging. It didn't spread. It didn't multiply. It remained, unmoved by understanding or ignorance. A residue that could not be taught because it was not learned. A word that never meant anything, and never stopped existing. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.